Welcome everyone on this New Year's for the Year of the Ox. It's great to see you all here, led by this perseverant animal. Hopefully this will be a year of stability and peace as we go forward into a uh, vaccinated population on this world, and we all can go back to life as normal. I am delighted to report that we have reservations tonight exceeding 200 screens from clay devotees from at least 15 states that I can figure out, 5 countries, including Japan, Israel, Canada, and England, a few journalists and academicians, and several museum curators. Tonight, I am welcoming 3 great friends of ridiculously long-standing that I cannot count the years, to talk to all of you about the joys of ceramics, both the process as well as the collecting. It's an addiction for so many of you here today. Following a friendship of more than 3 decades, it's with tremendous excitement that I'm able to collaborate at long last with my wonderful friend, Jeff Shapiro, on our very special virtual exhibition of his new sculptural work. We met many decades ago at an early exhibition at his familial home in New Rochelle. And I was already intrigued myself with Japanese ceramics and had collected some work by Japanese artists during travels to Japan, but this was not part of my business as a private dealer in Japanese art. And of course, as most of you know, that focus pivoted completely more than 25 years ago. And Japanese clay art has become my major pursuit and passion. And in fact, Jeff was actually instrumental in that in some way by introducing me many, many decades ago, when in Tokyo at the same time, to the young Kuroda Koji, with whom he was exhibiting, and who has now become one of the most important colleagues that I have for my gallery. I, in turn, at that time, introduced him to another gallerist and supporter from Osaka. So in many ways, his career and my career have been intertwined for decades, and often punctuated by surprise sightings of one another when touring in Japan with our friends and supporters. Through the decades and many exhibitions, both in the US and Japan, I have followed Jeff's career with admiration, happily acquiring works from my own home here and there. And from those early days, as an avid follower of the Bizen tradition and technique, to his current very independent and highly personal new work, his course of development has been inspiring for me to witness. So despite my gallery rule to handle only the clay art made by Japanese artists, I believe this new body of work to be so compelling, so dramatic, and so evocative that I had to make it available to my own clientele, who at least I thought were very Japanese focused. So it's with great pleasure that I introduce this new series of Cascades and Glacial landscapes to our virtual online audience, and also via our catalog that you can download from our website. So for tonight's event, I thought it would be more than appropriate, in fact, absolutely mandatory, that my dear friends, clients, and fellow addicts, who are also longtime fans of Jeff, both as an artist and a friend, join us this evening to offer their insights into the world of clay, both in the West and Japan. I am most grateful to Halsey and Alice North that they immediately accepted my invitation, and I am confident that all of you tonight will be both entertained and educated by the commentary that's ahead of you. So let me give a more formal introduction of our participants so you know a bit about their credentials. So we can have the next slide. Yeah. Jeff Shapiro was born in the Bronx in 1949 and was drawn to Japan to study ceramic art. He remained there for 9 years, from 1973 to 1981. And during that period, he studied with a number of Japanese potters from different regions, ending up in the newly built studio of an apprentice of the living national treasure Isizaki Jun. And actually, I believe his son is with us tonight, who was one of Jeff's apprentices many, many years later. Upon returning to the US in 1981, Jeff began building his own anagama and his studio in upstate New York, where he lives today with his gorgeous wife, Hinako. His inaugural series of anagama firing was in 1984. And over the past 35 years, Jeff has exhibited really all over the globe, in Europe, Australia, North America, and of course, Japan. He has twice exhibited in Germany with his mentor, Isizaki Jun, and in a 3-person show with the renowned French artist Claude Champy and the equally renowned Sujimura Shiro. And that show was seen on 3 continents. Over the past decade, he's had numerous solo shows with prestigious galleries throughout the United States, France, and Japan. Additionally, and equally important, Jeff has been an active, played the role as teacher and has received invitations around the world to lead workshops as far apart as India, Taiwan, New Zealand, Switzerland, France, Canada, Spain, and Bali. His artworks can be found in collections, private collections all over the world, and in museum collections as well. Alice and Halsey, both founding leaders of the North Group Incorporated, which helped many nonprofit organizations with fundraising, planning, and development over a 30-year career. Alice and Halsey are pioneering collectors of Japanese ceramic art and have helped to build the collection of Japanese clay art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. However, and part of the reason they are here tonight is they first started with American contemporary ceramics in 1971 and moved into the world of those made by Japanese artists 15 years later in '86. They first met Jeff at a symposium on wood-fired ceramics at Japan Society in 1987, and I was there, I remember that. And soon they were also collecting his work, leading to his engagement as leader of their 1995 ceramics tour of Japan. Currently, after more than a decade of research with Louise Court, the retired curator of ceramics at the Freer-Sackler, next year they are about to publish their really exciting book titled Listening to the Clay, Conversations with Contemporary Japanese Ceramic Artists. And truly, there are no greater cheerleaders for this field than Alice and Halsey. So thank you, all 3 friends, for being with us here tonight. And our format is that I will act as moderator and ask questions of all of our participants, after which, time allowing, we have some questions that have already been submitted. And if we have time, we will open the floor for questions via the chat function. So as we're going along, if any of you have questions, feel free to type them in on the chat function. So my first question is to Jeff. So Jeff, as Japan was not a well-known or popular destination for Americans in the 1970s, what drew you to go there in the first place? In such a highly structured society, how did you manage to get situated, accepted, and also become conversant in both the language and the culture? And specific to ceramic art, who in Japan was most important in launching your career?
First, I just wanted to thank you, Joan, and the whole gallery team for all this hard work that you put into this, the exhibition and the catalog and this Zoom panel. It's been a real pleasure the whole time working with all of you. And I want to thank you particularly for having enough confidence in my work to give me the opportunity to show these 2 bodies of sculpture. I realize that it is quite a departure for the gallery. And for that, I feel appreciative and quite pleased with the response so far. So I'd also like to thank Judy Schwartz for writing the essay for the catalog. I hope that you all have a chance to take a look at that when you can. And to Alice and Halsey North for participating in the Zoom session. So as far as your question, Joan, well, And let me just say one thing. When Joan mentioned in the beginning that we had these serendipitous meetings over these decades, I think the one particular she might have been referring to was when we met eye to eye as I was walking through the tunnel on the way to the Miho Museum, and she was actually returning, of all places in the world, to run into each other. It was quite something. But as far as your question, originally, I went to Japan to study, of all things, martial arts. So it wasn't until I actually visited Bizen, the town of Inbei, which is one of the 6 ancient kiln sites, that I decided to make this my career. So I spent the first 2.5 years in Kyoto studying Japanese language and learning to appreciate the culture in general. And Kyoto was just a wonderful place to be as a curious 23-year-old. And I had a number of experiences during the 9 years living in Japan with different teachers and different studios. And one of those very early ones was with Takatori Seizan in Kyushu. And she was an 11th generation potter, a descendant from a Korean pottery family. And that's where I gained an appreciation for nature in general and natural processes like using wood-fired kiln, hand processing clay, throwing on kick wheels. But the actual epiphany for me happened in Bizen when I had the opportunity to visit Isazaki Jun in this picture here, who is now living national treasure. This is many years ago before he was designated that title. But he invited me back to participate in a 10-day long firing of his wood kiln. And maybe it was the romanticism of it all, the smell of the wood, the rustic environment, and of course the surfaces that I was seeing coming from this wood kiln that I've never seen before. But when I saw those, I was hooked. And I think it was also something to do with the whole town of Bizen, this town that had maybe 250, 300 kilns, large kilns, wood burning kilns, dedicated to the industry of clay and ceramics. It really struck me more than just the work itself, more as a lifestyle. Jun became a mentor of mine. I didn't study with Jun, but I would go back often for discussions, and he was a very important mentor. And now, at 84 years old, he's actually making some of the strongest work of his life, I believe. And to me, that's incredibly inspiring. Think about that. And his son, Koichiro, who is also in this image, came to work in my studio for 2 years. And since returning to Japan a number of years ago, he's found his own voice, and he's making some beautiful work. And I'm always so happy to see that. There's another person, if we can go to the next picture, Takahara Shoji. This is an image of Halsey and Takahara. Takahara Shoji was another mentor of mine from Bizen. I had a number of mentors from throughout Japan, but another mentor from Bizen. And through visiting his studio, conversations with he and his wife, and watching kiln firings, talking about loading in particular, he had an amazing way of loading the beautiful clay that he used and got incredible effects in the ends of the firings. This was a Bizen yakishime, wood-fired unglazed platter. And there's a small anecdote, but let me just bring you up to date before the anecdote. There's a particular reverence for materials in Japan. So Bizen clay is comprised of basically 2 kinds. There's the smooth clay. It's a black, waxy clay that comes from underneath the rice fields. It used to be hand dug cubes and sold to the potters. And then there's a grainier, sandier, stonier clay that comes from the stream sides or the hills. And the clay character in any of the yakishime kiln sites, Bizen, Shigaraki, Iga, all of them, all of the 6, it's the clay character that stands out and makes a difference and separates it from all the others. So this is called Tsuchi Aji, that's the clay character. And the anecdote about Takahara-san, and I'll leave it up to you to decide what it means, is that when he was 20, in his 20s, he had finished studying with Isazaki Jun's father, Isazaki Yozan. And he had just enough money to purchase a piece of property and build a kiln, the studio, in his humble house. And right after that, it was discovered a very important clay deposit in the Bizen area. And he went to test it and realized how good it was and knew that he had to have this clay, but he didn't have much money. So he did whatever he could to get a hold of a fair amount of it and store it underneath the train tracks nearby his home. And he told himself, because he was only in his late 20s, that he wouldn't be producing his best work yet. So he told himself he would only allow himself to use 20% of this great clay in his clay composition, but that when he turned 60, when he should be at his prime, he would allow himself, as his 60th birthday, to switch the proportion from 20 to 80% of this really great clay. The bottom line of this is that, unfortunately, he passed away at 59 and a half. So I go over this a lot in my mind in terms of what that means, but the reverence for clay never changed. And as far as other mentors, another person, if we can go to the next slide, I believe, Tsuji Seimei, who's passed away quite a while ago now. He was another very important mentor to me. I was fortunate to have the relationship with Tsuji Seimei and his wife, the potter Tsuji Kyo. Tsuji Seimei-san was a wonderful ceramic artist, and he was able to procure all the best clays in Japan. And he often used a really good, stony, full of character shigaraki clay. And he had superior firing skills. And he had an unbridled way of expressing his creativity from his small dirt floor studio. He worked in this little nothing of a studio just outside of Tokyo. And he was also known for presenting a number of educational programs on various kiln sites in Japan on Japanese public television. So one time he happened to be at a sushi restaurant in Okayama near Bizen, and he called and said, "Come on down." And so I came down and we were having sushi. And while we were there, a collector called to say that he had acquired a 17th century sake bottle that he was interested in showing to Seimei-san. And when he came, Seimei-san picked up the tokuri bottle and caressed it in his hands, but he had an unsatisfied look. And then he said that it was indeed a beautiful bottle, but it actually needed to have sake in it to see how it actually worked. So he told the sushi chef to clean out the bottle, 17th century, and put his best sake inside. And drinking from that lopsided bottle that had most likely fallen over in the kiln and had just the right amount of movement to give it an abundance of character, plus 4 centuries of age, made it just a magnificent piece to be drinking from. I'll never forget that. Seimei-san actually bought 3 of my first sculptures that I ever showed in Japan at Gallery Koko in Kanda in Tokyo many years ago. And I think
I have another question for you
okay.
before we get to that slide. I just wanted to say you introduced me to Tsuji Seimei, and we were there together at his home and enjoyed an incredible nabe meal made by his incredibly talented wife, both as a ceramicist and as chef. Yeah. And I think of when I visit you and we enjoy Hinako's cuisine, I often think of that magical day back in 1990 something, where it was formidable. And she made the best, to this date, the best umeboshi I've ever had.
Right.
Very
yeah. Yeah, she was very, very special.